Incentive, not ideals or intentions, preserve both prosperity and moral freedom. Now, communism promised equality. Capitalism promised freedom. Both claimed to serve humanity, but only one delivered. Because one system was built on ideals or intentions, whereas the other was built on incentives. So one assumed that we were perfect, or you could think about the other way around, it also assumed that we were totally sinful and must be controlled. So either you're perfect or the other system accepted us, that just for the humans that we were imperfect, but at least we were trying. As long as the incentives were there, we were going to be good. Now, if we were all angels, we wouldn't need governments, but the fact that we know that we're not angels mean that even those that are in government, there needs to be certain controls on those that are in government. And the system for the incentives essentially have to be built correctly. This is what the founders of the American Revolution and the American system, the idea, were aware of. And when the dream met reality, one created prosperity and the other created gulags or prisons. Before we start, I'm giving away my $197 Wealth Builders Toolkit free for a limited period. It's the exact system I use to manage my money and plan investments. So grab it while it's still free, link in the description, and let's dive straight in. Let's talk about why incentives matter more than ideals or intentions. Incentives matter, that's like lesson 101 in economics when you go to college, and why freedom, not force, not compulsion, but just incentive, is the moral foundation of civilization. Communism began with a dream, a world without greed, poverty, or inequality. Has that happened? It sounded noble, moral even, but it was built on one fatal illusion, that you can change human nature by changing the system. You see, Karl Marx imagined people working selflessly for the common good, right? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But we all end up at the same finishing point, so why work so hard? So you know what? I'll pretend to work, and you can pretend to pay me, because at the end of the day, you won't have much money when the system isn't working like that. There was massive starvation, massive farm, massive issues. But real people don't work for abstractions. They work for purpose, like the kulaks, the pride in the family, right? The kulaks in Ukraine, there was massive starvation because any differences were associated with extraction, power, etc. But we move away from that. That was the whole idea, and it's a kind of a false ideal. It's pernicious that any reason why there's differences in outcome has purely to do with stealing, etc. And it's just not the case. And those that steal, the idea was that they're stealing purely because they're trying to feed themselves, nothing else. And that's why they elevated the role of prisoners in prison, the criminals that were stealing and thieves. They were elevated towards the best, whereas everybody else was just downtrodden. So if you were a good farmer, it was only because, you stole. So, they were just trying to totally equalize the playing field. Imagine a good violinist, a good pianist, and they say, well, the only reason that person is good is because he stole something. So let's break their fingers. We don't think morally that would be a good thing, but it's the same when it comes to doing well in business or doing well in farming, right? Luckily, my grandparents who were farmers grew up in the west of Ireland, but if they grew up in Ukraine, because they did somewhat good, somewhat okay, they probably would have been thrown into the gulag and would have died, and I wouldn't be alive today. So when you remove ownership, you remove those motives, purpose, pride, and family. Without incentives, production dies. And that's what we saw with the massive starvation in China, massive starvation in Russia, massive starvation in Cambodia, massive starvation in Cuba, massive starvation in Venezuela. And when production dies, freedom follows. This was almost attempted during the lockdowns. We saw the massive reduction in production in 2020, temporarily closed down. We saw the problems that created. I know it was through the guise and the idea of health. That's a different situation there. But we had that demand, that kind of power incentive, like old people being told that they couldn't go for walks, young people too told they couldn't go for walks, things that would be healthy, like being in the park, being on your own, even if you're not, strange diktats that were pushed out there by people that loved power. And, what did that result in? That resulted in a massive increase in the death rate. People that would normally be getting health concerns, things like heart transplant surgeries, were not allowed to do that. Millions of people were died in the attempt to save thousands of people. So, Again, this is what happened. It was always with good intention, but the outcome. Look at the outcome, not the intention. Look at what happens with the outcome. That's what policy should be judged on, the outcome. Because you can have great intentions, right? Like a lot of evil people or people in the past, they had great intentions, right? If you ask them, they have great intentions, but the outcome. And this is where it's too simplified or too naive a presupposition that people are purely evil or purely good. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, the line that separates good and evil runs through the heart and soul of every person, right? That's the line that separates good and evil. In other words, we've got a bit of good and a bit of bad, and we've got a bit of light and a bit of darkness, and we're fighting the two, so to speak. You don't have to get religious with this, but it's kind of a compulsions, right, on different sides of this. So again, capitalism starts from a different premise. It starts from the premise that, people are imperfect, but they are redeemable. It doesn't deny self-interest, right? It's not from the benevolence of the butcher or the baker, right? That's what we're talking about in Adam Smith, but it's their self-interest. It directs it in a very productive way. It says, if you want profit, then serve others. If you want success, earn trust. If you want power, take responsibility. Because in all of these things, they are repeated games. Reputation matters. If you screw people over, you will be discovered, you'll be found out, and you will not be successful long-term in business. It's not from one successful transaction you become wealthy. It's from a series of successful transactions. Anyone that's successful in the market long-term knows that. If you want long-term success, it has to be built on trust, built on long-time serving of others. So it really is service times competency is equal to purpose in this regard. How good you are, how much you're helping others, combine those two, and that gives you a sense of purpose. That's not cynicism. That's moral design. So we are accepting that people are not angels, and we're saying, okay, well, they're not angels, they respond to incentives, they respond to selfishness, so let's design this in such a way that it rewards good things. So instead of punishing ambition, it refines it. Instead of demanding perfection, it rewards contribution. I think that there is too much emphasis even given in school to like Shakespeare's character, the portrayal of Macbeth, for instance. So Macbeth, one of the four great tragedies of Shakespeare, is Macbeth. And his vaulting ambition is seen as the problem. Because he desires the kingdom. He wants to be the king of Scotland so strongly. He's willing to murder his uncle. It could happen. He could become king without murdering his uncle. It's potential. He has potential to become king. He's very close in line for it. But him and his wife is kind of whispering in his ear and kind of like, pushing him on, like, you'd be much more of a man if you did this dark thing. But it was his ambition that was kind of killing. But then ambition gets a negative thing, because of course it can go in different directions, right? But instead of demanding perfection here in counter-capitalism, we're just rewarding contribution. Doesn't need perfection. So communism tried to build heaven on earth, whereas capitalism, it built systems that, let fallen humans do good despite themselves. Now, the scoreboard, it's undeniable. So let's have a look at this. Under communism, over 100 million dead in the 20th century. Now you can play with numbers, but that's missing the point. There are tens of millions. There are millions, if not tens of millions, that are dead under communism. We're not talking about wars. It's not like, I made a transaction under capitalism and I died from eating too many hamburgers. We're not talking about that. We're talking about literally, because of the policies of communism, over 100 million died in the 20th century. Any debate about the number, it's missing the point, because you're just not... People, they're concerned about one death. They're concerned about 10 deaths, 13. They're not concerned. Stalin himself said, one death is a tragedy. But a million death is a statistic. People are just not gifted that. They get cold when they think of the millions. If you took that one death and you multiplied that by 100 million, right? That's the pain. And that's something that we still need to learn. We still haven't learned that. I hope we learn that. But under capitalism, 1990, 2017, just that brief 27-year period there, the fastest poverty reduction in human history. Over 1 billion people getting lifted out of poverty. It's not the badness of the systems, it's the goodness. There has been really next to no good that communism, even socialism, has really created. They all create bad stuff. Don't look at the similarities. They all, slavery existed under nearly every civilization. Look at the difference. The difference is only under capitalism have you had this rapid increase in living standards. We would still be dying at the ripe old age of 30 to 40 years old. That would be the life expectancy if it wasn't for capitalism and the innovation, the growth, the Industrial Revolution, the modern age, the production, the progress essentially we've had under capitalism to innovate and to be rewarded for that, rather than monarchs or absolute tyrants or commissars taking the profit. It was under capitalism we've had these advances. Now, in terms of these advances, well, from China's reforms, from opening up to India's liberalization, from South Korea, the difference between North Korea and South Korea, to Poland after communism in the 1980s, every place that embraced markets saw life expectancy, literacy, and income soar. I saw this firsthand in my home country of Ireland as I grew up. We typically only had one car per household. Then within 10 years, 2 cars per household. We were going on holidays all the time. We were going around. There was just so much material, money, etc. that really took off. We were in dark, destitute days before this. Of course, I didn't live in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, but I still remember early childhood memories in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and things not being too good, right? People emigrating, crying, tears, neighbours talking about their sons that had to leave a few years ago. There was a lot of that. And it's the same with Eastern Europe. I visited Eastern Europe in the late 1990s, and everything was super cheap, and place looked like it was kind of war-torn. Like it really did look pretty poor. Croatia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Czech Republic, these countries, Poland. But then you go forward a few years and you can see how fast they've taken up, right? They've really progressed economically as they've opened up. Every place that clung to communism saw starvation and silence. Ideals promised equality, whereas incentives produced dignity. Freedom, not force, fed the poor. This is the great unsung song that has happened the last few decades. The massive increase in richness and the reduction in poverty. The over 1 billion people getting lifted out of poverty by systems in the former third world that were adopting and embracing capitalism that previously didn't have it. Here's what very few people understand. Capitalism is not moral because it rewards greed. It's moral because it exposes it. If you are greedy to the extent that you're not willing to serve your neighbours in the right way and you don't care about making a quick buck and screwing them over, you won't last in the market very long because you get reviews and you'll get ratings and you'll get reputation destruction and you won't be able to stay in business very long. It's moral, as I said, because capitalism exposes greed. It's a mirror. It's not a mask, right? It's not closing down like the Iron Curtain in Russia. In freedom, you can lie, you can steal, and you can exploit. I'm not denying that, but you will fail. You will not be consistently profitable over time. If you think about the East India Company, you might throw back, oh, well, Michael, the East India Company, the UK, that was not pure capitalism. That was almost plutocracy, where it was through government that stepped in and gave the East India Company pretty much blanket monopoly right. And that's one of the problems that, sometimes under capitalism we go towards oligopoly, just a few controlling everything, or monopoly, or duopoly, there's 2, but monopoly, there's only 1 controlling. But that's moving away from pure capitalism. And that's when the government gets into crony capitalism. That's where crony capitalism is government intervention to the extent where the government is giving the contracts based on political clout. Maybe you've got a cousin that's in the government. Maybe you've got a relative that's a local administrator and you get the contract. You're not competing on merit. You're not competing on profitability. You're competing just purely on political clout, lobbying power, and you get the role. And there's the problem there is when the economy starts to tank, as we saw in East Asian countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, etc., other countries as well, Taiwan, we saw that the companies getting the contracts, so their crony capitalism, once the economy started to tank, the interest rate that they were paying on loans to borrow, etc., they could no longer afford because their profit was not good, because they weren't good companies to begin with, right? And that's the difference. If we have an equal playing field and we let compete, then those that are more profitable, more competitive, will be able to pay back these loans, will be able to pay the interest and will survive. And you'll have a less corrupt system, you'll have less attacks, so to speak, on your system. So in freedom, as I said, you can do all those things. You can lie, you can steal, you can exploit, but you will fail. Whereas in communism, you can do all those things and you'll be promoted. Because when truth becomes dangerous, power replaces honesty. That's why every communist regime ends the same way. We've had over 100 years of it now at this point, more than 100 years, right? I don't know how much more experiments we can do, because what you get at the end is these noble slogans are still echoing. The prisons, the gulags are still full. All those death camps, etc., the torture, going into the villages and massively eradicating the population in Cambodia, for instance, under Pol Pot, just a 5-year period. A free system can only survive with moral people. A coercive one survives precisely because it destroys them. Anyone that's loud enough to speak out gets silenced. Whether they were the priests, whether they were the kulaks, whether they were trade unionists even, like whether even it went for everyone. I mean, under the fascism system, they went under for the trade unionists, they went for the socialists, etc. But the thing with capitalism is it allows everybody a voice, allows everybody to speak. It doesn't care, only color it cares about is green, so to speak, right? You won't persist. So a free system can only survive with moral people. If you have amoral people, if you've got immoral people, yeah, the free system will not thrive when it's all immoral people, right? It just won't. And it's those that are able to create trust and that can do repeated trust that do the best over time. It's a moral rebellion. It's a denial that the human soul is flawed, yet it's free. It replaces conscience with compulsion. It replaces faith or faith in something deeper, maybe whether it's God, with government. Government is God. Government becomes the all. Capitalism, by contrast, that assumes moral responsibility is personal. It trusts the individual, you and me. It holds them or us accountable. So that's why capitalism, and we could think about on the Western side, you could think about Judeo-Christian culture, because eventually you have to go down the actual rabbit hole of like, well, what beyond physics to metaphysics, beyond that to epistemology, like what can we actually learn, towards moral philosophy, what is right, what is wrong, what's the relation, and then eventually where does it all come from in theology, theologians discuss this. You can think of the Judeo-Christian, and of course it does extend to other things too, but the modern Western Judeo-Christian morality grew together, right? That's where capitalism and that through Athenian ideas and also Jerusalem ideas, both say that you are free to choose. Again, Confucian as well, you got the duty, you got Hinduism, Sikh, etc. You've got a lot of other ones as well. But looking at the West, where capitalism really grew, like why was it here that it really grew the most? Because here you are free to choose. And you are responsible for what you choose. This was the small government, the opening up, the moving away from pure, absolute tyrannical monarchy and the total rule of the church to a gradual, the church did provide some of the moral ethics, but it had to have this kind of combined with the market, right, and allowing the freedom to choose. Right, that's what, it was a miracle in a sense. That's a bit like evolution in a sense, right, that like we evolved to survive, but the same with the market. But again, because you're free to choose, but you're also responsible, that, not equality, is the foundation of justice. You don't need to fix everything at once. Just start with one small win. That's why I'm giving away my Wealth Builders Toolkit. It's the exact system that helped me move from theory to progress. It's free for a limited period, then it goes back up to $197. So click the link in the description and grab it while it's still available. So the greatest tragedy of the 20th century wasn't that communism failed. It's that millions believed it would succeed if only people were better. If only, there's no real communism. That wasn't real communism. I've heard that before 100 times. A lot of the time they say that it's usually because they want to be in control themselves, right? And it's like, well, if they don't want to be in control, who's going to be in control? We know from Machiavelli's The Prince, like what will actually happen? Not ideas, not utopia, what actually will happen? It's like, well, who is going to be the one? Those that are more power hungry will become the commissars, will become the heads. And they're not always the best, they're not the best people. In fact, if they are the best people, they'll be stabbed in the back, they'll be shot, they'll be assassinated. The best people do not run these systems. Stalin did it, Lenin did it for a while. Of course, Trotsky eventually was a pickaxe to the back of his head, right? And the same with Pol Pot, the same with King Jong-il. All these countries are not run by the best people, right? And the assumption is they must be. And when they're not run by the best people and they've got all the control, it's centralized control, that's the problem, right? That's the greatest tragedy. It's not, again, that it didn't succeed or that communism failed. It's that millions believed it would succeed if only people were better. But capitalism, on contrast, it never required saints, only required truth. So it accepted us for who we were, not saints. It just requires truth. Incentives, not intentions, not ideals, built the modern world. That is the core lesson here. Freedom channels the best in us, and it contains the worst in us if we set it up correct. That's the moral order, not moral chaos. Because the choice was never between capitalism and compassion. It was between freedom with virtue or tyranny with slogans. Capitalism doesn't need fixing, we do. And the first step is to remember that a moral society cannot exist without free people.